Good afternoon and welcome to a meeting of the Council at 2 p.m. on Wednesday the 26th of May 2021. Can I please remind you all to switch your phones to silent for the duration of the meeting. In addition, can I refer you to the protocols for remote meetings which have been previously circulated. Namely, your microphone should be switched to mute unless you are speaking. The Democratic Services Officer will take a roll call at the start of the meeting for all members and officers. Should you wish to ask a question or make a comment, can you please indicate either by the chat function or by raising your electronic hand by Teams. I will assume that you have all read the paperwork before us today prior to a meeting. And when speaking, please could you introduce yourself? I am Councillor John Warman, the Mayor. Jane, if you could now take a roll call.
You're on mute, Jane.
Sorry. Councillor Aubrey.
Present.
Councillor Bamsey.
Present.
Councillor Causey.
Present.
Councillor Clark. Councillor Helen Clark. I've had apologies from Councillor Carol Clement Williams. Matthew Crowley.
I'm here, Jane.
All right. Matthew Crowley.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Stephanie Lynch. Councillor Lynch. Right. Councillor Arthur Davis.
Present.
Councillor Nicola Davis.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Oliver Davis.
Present, Jane.
Apologies from Ros Davis. Councillor Carlin Edwards.
We're trying to get her in now, Jane.
Right. Councillor Jamie Evans. Councillor Evans, Jamie Evans. Councillor Freegard.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Galsworthy.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Wyndham Griffiths.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Joe Hale.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Sian Harris.
Present.
Apologies from Councillor Harvey. Councillor Nigel Hunt.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Steve Hunt.
I'm here, Jane.
Councillor Hurley.
Present, thank you.
Apologies from Chris James. Councillor Hugh James.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Jones. Chris Jones.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Doreen Jones.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Hugh Jones. Hugh Jones. Councillor Hugh Jones. Councillor Jane Jones.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Ian Jones.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Rob Jones. Councillor Scott Jones.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Dennis Keogh.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Noyle.
Yes, I'm here, thank you.
Councillor Latham.
Yeah, present, Jane.
Councillor Dean Lewis. Councillor Llewellyn.
Present, Jane. Present.
Councillor Lockyer.
Present, Jane.
Councillor McGrath.
Yes, present, Jane.
Councillor Miller. John Miller.
Present, Jane, but I'm going to have to leave the meeting as explained.
Yes, okay. Councillor Sandra Miller.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Vivian Misen.
Present, not present, Jane.
Deputy Mayor. Councillor Morgan.
Present, all.
Councillor Paddison.
Present.
Councillor Penry.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Peters.
Present.
Councillor Phillips. Ross Phillips. Rebecca Phillips.
Present.
Councillor Mark Prothero.
Present, thanks, Jane.
Councillor Purcell.
Present.
Councillor Percy.
Present.
Councillor Harman.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Peter Rees.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Renkist.
Present.
I've had apologies from Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Anthony Richards.
Present, all. Present, Jane.
Councillor Peter Richards.
Present, Jane.
Councillor Marcia Spooner.
Presennol present.
Councillor Anthony Taylor,
Present, Jane.
Councillor Rachel Taylor,
Present Jane.
Mr Mayor, I marked you as present.
Yeah, thank you, Jane.
Councillor Whitelock,
Present, thank you, Jane.
Councillor Chris Williams.
Present, thank you, Jane.
Apologies from Councillor Wingrave, Councillor Wood,
Present.
Councillor Woolcock.
Presennol, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any members present who I have not called? Right, I shall go on to officers. Karen Jones,
Presennol present.
Nicola Pierce. Nicola,
Present.
Howell Jenkins,
Present.
Andrew Jarrett,
It's Angela Thomas covering for Andrew Jarrett.
thank you, Angela. Andrew Thomas,
Present, Jane.
Craig Griffiths,
Present, Jane.
Stacey Curran,
Present.
Mike Shaw,
Present, Jane. Thank you.
and now any officers present that are participating in the meeting that I haven't called the name? Because I'll go on now to the Audit Wales office. Non Jenkins,
Presennol present.
Colin Davis,
Present.
Gillian Gillett,
Present.
and Justine Morgan. Justine Morgan,
Present Jane.
there we are. That's the roll call completed, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillors, it is with great sadness that I inform Council of the death of former Councillor Mark Jones, who represented the Aberavon ward. As a mark of respect, can I ask Council to observe a minute's silence? Thank you. On a happier note, I ask the Council to join with me in congratulating Mrs. Joanna Jenkins, who has been appointed High Sheriff of West Glamorgan for 2021-2022. Mrs. Jenkins is also a lay member of the Council's Audit and Governance Committee. Also, on behalf of the Council, I would like to welcome our newest member, Councillor Stephanie Lynch, to her first meeting of Council. Councillor Lynch represents the Aberavon ward. Stephanie, we look forward to seeing you with your decisive powers in future meetings and making your contributions. Item 2, members' interests. Are there any interests to declare? Please indicate by raising your electronic hand by Teams, or indicate by the chat function when called and state details. The Democratic Services Officer will then forward an electronic version of the declaration of interest form for you to complete and email back to the officer.
I can see no indications, Mr Mayor. So that's it.
Thank you. To item 3, minutes of previous meetings of Council. I refer to the minutes of previous Council meetings held on the 9th and the 24th of March 2021, Before I move confirmation of their accuracy, are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes?
I can see no indications, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I now move confirmation of the accuracy of the minutes. Can I have a seconder?
Second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. If you do not indicate to the contrary, it will be assumed that you are in favour of the recommendation.
No indications, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I now go on to agenda on item 4, Audit Wales Biannual Summary 2020. On behalf of the Council, I'd like to welcome in today's meeting and call upon Mrs. Karen Jones, Chief Executive, to introduce the team.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You've got a practice as council of inviting the council's external auditors to come and address you once a year. And what they do as part of their presentation is outline the studies that they've undertaken, the conclusions that they've drawn, and give you an opportunity to directly raise questions with the auditors. So I think it's a really important part of your annual cycle of meetings. Today, Colin Davis, who's been leading that work over the last year, is handing over to Non Jenkins, who takes over. Non isn't a stranger to the council. She was our auditor many years ago. And in the introductory remarks, I think you've introduced the other members of the audit team that are with him this afternoon. So I'm going to hand over to Colin now, who I think is going to start to take you through the report. And I think the intention is that Non will come in then and maybe say some words at the end of Colin's address.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, please would you present to the Council the summary, followed by Mrs. Jenkins, who will address the forward work programme for Audit Wales.
Certainly, and good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank Karen, the Chief Executive. She's made my job very easy this afternoon. Her covering report that's contained within your papers, which I know you have read, is particularly helpful. I found it particularly helpful in signposting to me where our individual audit reports have been submitted to and considered by members during the year. It's very helpful. And Karen's report also helpfully highlights the key messages from our audit summary, and I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear I'm not going to go through in detail each page of the report, but rather to highlight the key messages. Our summary sets out the work that we've completed since the last report we issued to you in September 2019. It points out that we've made no formal recommendations resulting from our work over the past period, and sets out that we've provided an unqualified opinion on the council's accounts for 2019-20. That was issued in September 2020. We've also reported that the council's met its improvement planning and reporting duties. Those are statutory duties placed on the council by the local government measure. We concluded that the council's financial position is strong. I know that'll be good news to Howell, who has our best wishes, and I know is retiring later this year. The council's financial position is strong, which makes it well placed to be sustainable over the medium term. Now, of course, we wouldn't be regulators if we didn't identify also opportunities for the council to improve. And our summary also highlights some of those opportunities. One or two of those I'd like to mention here. There are opportunities for the council to strengthen its corporate arrangements for safeguarding. There are also opportunities to improve its application of its sustainable development principles, which are required under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And again, the council could better utilise its corporate performance management system to improve its strategic business planning. So there's a mix there of some very positive statements, which the council should be very pleased to hear, and some opportunities to improve that I know, based on the response of officers so far, that the council's officers have accepted, and they will be putting through the scrutiny and audit committee process those recommendations before councillors and setting out what the council intends to do in response. I also believe that the chair of scrutiny will have had a letter from us, possibly this week or last week, highlighting the arrangements that would be helpful if the council has in place to consider our reports as part of its scrutiny and audit committee business. Our summary also references the work of our fellow regulators in Estin and CIW, and those are summarised within your papers that you have for today's business. Karen set out that I'm accompanied by colleagues who will be taking our work forward with the council, and before we take any questions or I hand over to Non, I'd like to thank officers and members for their cooperation over the last 2 years, as I will no longer be overseeing the audit work at the council myself. It's very much appreciated, and once again I thank you. So if I could introduce Non on that basis, and I'm sure she'll take you through what you can look forward to in terms of our audit programme over the coming period. Thank you.
Diolch, Colin, and diolch, Deirydd. Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the welcome too. Looking forward to working with you again, some of you from before. I recognise many faces, but thank you very much for the welcome again. So yes, as Colin set out, the last year we have worked flexibly with all of the councils across Wales, given it's been a tough year for all of us in that sense, but hopefully in a way that we've been able to work alongside you to help you with the issues that you're grappling with, and also to learn from what is happening, because we're keen to learn and share that learning across Wales too. So, and in the last year, things have moved fast, and each council has been learning from each other. So we have been trying to help that by through our COVID learning project. So thank you very much for inviting us into that and sharing things with us so that we could also share across Wales and vice versa. And hopefully we can continue in that vein in terms of working alongside you. Working remotely like this helps that in that sense, so we can tap into things as they're happening. We can understand things as they're happening rather than just do our work based on documents or minutes and things like that. We can hear it in the moment, which is important for you and for us to understand the context of things. So in that vein, and given where councils are at the moment, there are many risks obviously facing you, but in that I see that as opportunity too. This is a year of opportunity to see what now can be done, and obviously you're working on your recovery programme as part of that. So we're hoping to work alongside you on that and look at how you're going to be springing forward as our project in terms of how resilient the council and councils across Wales are in that programme and progress to take you forward into the new world, shall we say. And also we'll be doing another piece of work which is around which is part of our key and basic essential piece of work really around assurance and risk assessment, and that we will be doing also across obviously the 22 councils, but we'll be specifically looking at some key areas in all of the councils, because again you're all facing some similar issues such as recovery, such as the Local Government Election and Elections Act, such as carbon reduction plans, but also we'll be looking at how you followed up from previous work that we've done with you and how you're progressing on that and looking across things, and obviously we'll feed that back, and that will also help inform our forthcoming next year's work too. So I'll stop there, but in that, I'm really looking forward to working alongside you again. So thank you very much again. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Mr. Davis and Mrs. Jenkins. Members, are there any questions or comments? Please raise your electronic hand or indicate by the chat function, and I will call upon you in turn. I've got it on here. Councillor Purcell, was it? Stephen. Councillor Steve Hunt, I'll see you now.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Colin and Non for the report. It's very encouraging as far as Neath and Talbot go. I welcome the report on the extensive work you undertake in your roles. Can I just ask a question on page 22? I'm Councillor Steve Hunter. The Mayor said for us to introduce ourselves, and I'm a ward member for Seven Sisters. On page 22 and 6, looking at local work undertaken with Audit Wales every year, the report published then about local government sector. And on that page, about the front door to social care, public service boards, progress of implementing the violence against women, domestic abuse, sexual violence, rough sleepers, better lawmaking and commercialisation in local government. Can I just ask a question? Those, like some of the reports 2019, 2020, ongoing work within your auditor role, how do you have a comparison of the 22 authorities on this particular work? I do appreciate it. It's a moving thesis as continues all the time and things change to implement it. But I just wanted a better understanding of possible correlation with different local authorities, really, where deprivation may play a major role in a lot of the work that you do. I'm sorry, perhaps you won't have the answers here now, but I just need a better understanding on that work, if you understand what I'm trying to ask you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. The work that you've highlighted there, as Karen's report said, this audit summary reports back to you on the local projects that we've undertaken directly with Neath Port Talbot County Borough Council, but it also highlights, as you have highlighted on page 22, that we undertake studies on a national basis across the local government sector, and those reports, we may have conducted field work in Neath Port Talbot, we may not. Some of those reports are based on field work undertaken at a small number of councils, but it highlights messages that we think are of national relevance. And so we share those reports widely. We hope that the information contained within them will be useful context for you. And specifically, we ask you to look at the national recommendations that are relevant to local authorities and to consider whether those recommendations are something that's an issue for Neath Port Talbot. And when I mentioned the letter to the chair of government, the chair of scrutiny earlier this week, it was particularly that issue that was one of the reasons for writing. Some councils don't have very good arrangements in place to consider these national reports and to reflect on the recommendations contained with them. And so that letter asks you to look at your own arrangements and to consider whether you feel that those are appropriate or whether you need to be a little bit more structured in considering these reports. And I'm sure that Karen and her officers can be helpful to you if that's something that you'd like to consider in any way. As to whether or not there's a comparison between councils and for those with high deprivation, etc. I guess it's sort of horses for courses. It depends on the nature of the study and whether we think deprivation is a key issue in relation to the subject matter. But as I've said, because they're only conducted at less than the whole of the 22 councils of Wales, it would be difficult for them to draw those specific comparisons. But where we are able to compare, we certainly try to do that because we know it's helpful.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can I just briefly come back
Yep.
to Colin? Yeah, thank you for that, Colin. I got a better understanding now of the work that you carry out in pockets. And what I was trying probably to not put you on the spot in any way or form was that if you did do 22 authorities in their own right, you'll probably find specifics that was key to them. And I suppose you're probably saying that you would let the authorities identify their own problems as to deal with your report. So
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hunt.
somebody muted me. I don't know what he got there. Sorry about that.
I now call on Councillor Nigel Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and keep this brief. There's something on page 25. There's a key fact on page 25 and a key fact on page 26 that I'd like to ask a question about. So as of it says, as of the 31st of March 2020, the council had 59.1 million of usable financial reserves. This is equivalent to 19% of the council's annual spend on services, and it's the joint 9th highest percentage of the 22 unitary councils in Wales. Could you tell us how could we look at that table and see the variant of percentages? Like if we're at 19%, what is like the highest percentage and what's the lowest percentage? Or how would we be able to see that on a key fact? And on page 26, it says that
You've gone on to mute.
Councillor Hunt, you're on mute.
You're muted, Nigel.
sorry. So did you hear either of those questions? Have you not heard me then?
The
No, I
first
heard
one,
that
Councillor Hunt, I
question.
think it was the second one that they didn't hear.
Okay, I'll try to keep it brief. The key fact on page 26 says Neath County Borough Council has 15% of the areas deemed the most deprived, 10% of areas in Wales. This is the 5th highest of the 22 unitary council in Wales. I mean, so what I wouldn't mind seeing is a map of these 40 or the 15% of areas in Neath Talbot which are regarded as being in the top 10% most deprived in Wales. And how do you feel like we're doing enough, either in the authority to try and get some balance on that and improve on that, and are the Welsh Government giving us funds and the means to do that? Because obviously that is something that we can improve on being the 5th highest in 22 unitary authorities. So that's my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. If I take the first question first, the 59.1 million of usable financial reserves, and can you see a table of how that fits or how that compares with other councils? Not within our audit summary, but I think I'm right in saying in our financial sustainability report, there will be comparative measures there. The latest financial sustainability report is currently in draft and will be cleared through the council's reporting processes shortly. And when that emerges, it will come through to members. You should be able to see the information there. If you can't, I'm sure if you'd like to see a comparative chart, Howell, before he goes, I'm sure will be glad to share one with you. You know, this isn't information that's privy solely to Audit Wales. This is information that's out there in the public domain. So it's certainly available for you to see, if not through our financial sustainability report. If you were to ask Howell, I'm sure he would oblige you. When I said earlier today that one of the things we've reported in our summary is the council has a strong financial position, that's one of the measures we would have used to draw that conclusion. Usable financial reserves are that. They're the money in your back pocket that you can use, but is also representative of your relative financial resilience. And there's an old saying that says it's for use when it's raining. Well, I think most of us would accept that it's raining quite heavily at the moment. So I'm sure, again, if you speak to Howell, he would be able to set out the council's current plans as to, in the budget that you've set this year, the extent to which those usable financial reserves will be applied to take the council forward in terms of the objectives it's set for itself. The second question you asked about the areas of deprivation, again, that's information in the public domain, and I'm sure if you wanted to see how Neath Talbot compares with others, then that could be made available to you by officers. Then you come to the difficult question, which you threw in the end, says, along the lines of, could the Welsh Government give you any more money to help you, given that those are factors that you deal with? You know, the nature of the Welsh Government local settlement has been the subject of many books, and I'm sure any of us could write one from our own perspective. So that's something I'm afraid I wouldn't comment on. Other than to say that I think we all recognise that after 10 years of austerity, the last two settlements that you've received from Welsh Government have been rather better than you might have expected. And I think also it's generally recognised that the very significant extra expenditure that you've been required to meet, together with the income that you've lost as a result of the pandemic, has largely been covered by the Welsh Government. Otherwise, that would have been something that your strong reserve would probably have had to be utilised for. So I think, you know, the conversations should continue with Welsh Government in terms of its financial support for councils and also the other support that it provides. But thanks for your question.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Purcell.
Thank you. Looking at the report, I can see the difference between reports on things that are specific to Neath Talbot, and I notice on page 21 that the review of the corporate arrangements for safeguarding will come back to the committee that I chair, the Scrutiny Committee. That's fine. When we look at page 29 and we look at the generalised investigations into local government in general, two of those areas also refer to social services. Now, tomorrow, the Social Care, Health and Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee draws up its forward work programme. So this is particularly good timing. Would you suggest it to be a good idea if we looked at those two things that you have highlighted that are relevant to social services and include looking at that in our forward work programme in Neath Talbot's social services? Would you think that's a good idea?
I think those local government study reports, the ones that you refer to in relation to social care, I think what would be useful is if those reports went to the committee for consideration and you had a particular focus on the recommendations they contain. I think it would be useful if in conducting that scrutiny review, officers were able to highlight for you as context whether or not officers considered that those recommendations had a relevance and were a priority for Neath Talbot Council to address. If they felt that they weren't, that's perfectly okay, but you might ask them why they feel that. if it's a relevant recommendation to make in one council, what arrangements does Neath or Talbot have in place that mean it doesn't need to take action there? Those would be good questions to ask officers if they felt that it wasn't a priority. If they feel that there certain recommendations are a priority, it'd be useful to members to understand why that's the case and what actions officers propose to take to address them. So I think, yes, and I think the letter that we wrote to all councils, chairs of scrutiny last week, sets out in a little bit more detail that sort of suggestion that we think would be helpful scrutiny for members to take forward.
Thank you very much for that. Those were my thoughts. Thank you.
Councillor Alan Llewellyn.
Diolch, Mr. Mayor. Thanks very much for the introduction to the report, to the audit team. Now, Councillor Nigel Hunt has referred to the comparatively healthy reserves situation. I realise this is going back to 2019, 2020, and there has been some adjustment since then. But obviously, members will be aware that we still have the third highest council tax level in Wales, and as we know from the recent CAB report, that is a significant contribution to domestic budgeting problems in Wales. So I think it's something that we do have to be very aware of. And I'd also like to ask, in the light of the report's reference to comparative poverty levels within the county borough, because the auditors are referring to several comparative studies with other local authorities within this report, is it possible for the auditors to point us towards comparative work on good practice in reducing inequalities within areas?
It would certainly be a fair challenge for you to present to the audit team if that's information that would help you. The council has set its corporate well-being objectives, and certainly dealing with or helping to support vulnerable members of your communities features very strongly in there. And of course, relative poverty and deprivation are factors that the council would seek to address through its actions. And you're not unique in that situation. Other councils in Wales have that same goal and experience and have to support communities with similar deprivation. So it's certainly a valid question to ask us. I've said that I'm bowing out, so it's probably not me you'd ask that question to. It's probably to Non, who's coming through the door, and her team. And I'm sure she'd be delighted to be presented with the challenge. I think, speaking for Audit Wales, it's something that we're looking to make the focus of our approach. In the past, we could have been accused of being a rather retrospectively focused regulatory team who audit the past and tell you how you could have done things better if you'd known. We want to shift that approach to one that's working alongside you in real time and offering up insight and support that is timely and to help you move forward. So yes, please pose that question of us. I don't know the answer today, but I'm sure Non will be keen to find out. Thank you.
And sorry, and just to come in on that, I'm looking forward to working with you and maybe doing something across more than one council, when working regionally to understand this. We're all starting afresh in some areas of this, but from a very different base. And I suppose the first point is what is that base that we're working with now? So let's have that discussion. Let's in a very open way, and then help each other to share that learning going forward. Because as Colin said, you're not alone in that sense. And it is one of the key strands in our annual plan as an Audit Wales to be looking at on these particular issues. So, you know, open to any discussions around how we can help going forward, really.
Mr. Mayor, if I could come back in briefly, I'm grateful for those responses, because obviously, you know, we have many experiences here within Neath Talbot. We have some good practice in Neath Talbot, but we know that there's good practice elsewhere as well. And I think you know, this is one of the key challenges facing Wales as a whole, is the levels, comparative levels of deprivation and inequality, and issues around economic activity and economic inactivity. So I think that any work that we can help to contribute towards with other local authorities and with the audit bodies, I think, and I'm, you know, grateful for what Colin said and what Non said now, that, you know, that the auditors are looking perhaps to be more proactive in this field. You know, there's something a little bit sterile about just looking back at what's happened before, even though it's important. I think it's creating a new environment for taking Wales forward and taking Neath Talbot forward. I think is something that we should be looking to do with our audit partners. Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Llewellyn. I now call on Councillor Clement Williams, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hi, Non and Colin. Thank you for your time today. I'm Carol Clement Williams, and I'm the Cabinet Member for Finance. I just wanted to say, you know, this isn't an actual budget debate today, but in the report, there is another tab onto the Council Sustainability, and in there you have given us a good report on sustainability, and we pride ourselves in being very careful with our money. I'd just like to add or ask you both, or one or the other of you, if you would agree with Rob Whiteman's report from SIPFA, that councils shouldn't be using their reserves on a regular basis to pay for day-to-day revenue costs. We have actually had to use 3 million this year. Obviously, this is for the previous financial year, but during this financial year, we have had to use 3.1 million out of our reserves to balance that. Would you agree with me and Rob White, the head of SIPFA, that to be prudent and not to use too much money to pay for our services on a day-to-day basis is not sustainable, or is not sustainable to do this in the medium to long term? Thanks.
I suppose the short answer, Carol, is yes. I said earlier that having a healthy level of usable, and usable is the word that goes with it, financial reserves is considered a strength. And those reserves, to coin a phrase, are to help the council and to be able to get through rainy days. So the message isn't that you mustn't use them and that they're to be applauded if you can build them up to high levels, but they are there when they are needed. But when you use them, they're used, they're gone. You can only use them once. And so that's where sustainability comes in. If in setting a budget, you agree to spend a certain amount of money that you don't have there in your revenue stream, and you utilize reserves, then as I've said, you can only do that once. So what's going to happen the next year? Do you still have that need? Do you still need to make that expenditure? And that needs to be brought in within the council's revenue budget planning, not from the outside on reserves. But I suppose the other thing that I could do is, as well as working alongside you and supporting you and giving you information, we're there to challenge. And so there is a challenge around this. You know, we have said the council has a strong financial position. It's got healthy reserves. Councillor Llewellyn has also pointed out that you have a high level of deprivation. You have significant need out there. And so I suppose that my challenge would be, is the council too careful? Is the council spending enough? Could the council do more and extend its corporate objectives through financial and other resource means to improve the lot of its vulnerable and needy citizens? Is a valid challenge to make.
Can I
And
come
so,
back
yes,
on that?
I do agree with SIPA, particularly around reserves, but also you can't talk about finance uniquely. You have to also talk about what the council's objectives are and how it brings all of its resources to bear to deliver its objectives as effectively as possible.
Thank you. Can I come back on that, Mr. Mayor? We did do that. We used 3 million. What I'm saying is it's not sustainable in the medium to long term. So I'm sorry, I'm being distracted by somebody making never mind. That it's not sustainable moving forward. And when I checked with the fiscal office in the Cardiff University as to whether we should have used any more, I was asked what services would we like to cut. So, you know, we are trying to be prudent. We are using it, but we are trying to limit that use. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's really the end of the questions. Thank you for your report, Mr. Davis.
Mr. Mayor, sorry, I have indicated.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Mayor. Just to come back on the discussion. I mean, the cabinet member for finance started her remarks by saying that she didn't want to rerun the budget debate, but that I think that's exactly what she did try to do. And I think, you know, we're at some distance from the budget debate itself, but I welcome the points that the audit team have made about the way in which we should be looking at these issues, and that we can actually be quite sort of creative, perhaps, of looking at the resources that we do have. So you know, I'm encouraged by the response from the audit team. That in fact we do need to look creatively at the way that we use reserves and that we use our resources, and I look forward to the point that Non Jenkins made about looking collaboratively with other authorities about adopting good practice of the way that we can combat inequality, and particularly the pressure that our residents are under by having such a very high council tax rate. And you know, the lack of resources in many of our communities. So I think we should welcome this as an opportunity for an open and very positive debate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members. You've had a full debate on this now. Thank you for your report, Mr. Davis. And now we refer members to the recommendations on page 23 of the report. Can I ask for a proposer and a seconder?
I move, Mr. Mayor.
I second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. If you do not indicate to the contrary by raising your electronic hand, it will be assumed that you are in favour of the recommendations.
I can see no indications, Mr. Mayor, so that has been approved.
Thank you. Now on to item 5, which is the corporate plan for 2021-2023. I call upon the leader of the council to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, when this corporate plan was presented to Cabinet, the point was made that this is a very different plan compared to those that had previously been presented to full council. In the last financial year, we have faced two of the toughest challenges we could ever have imagined. We began the year in emergency response mode as part of a national effort to respond to COVID. The efforts across the county borough to sustain critical services and to support those most at risk have been nothing short of extraordinary. I know that all members of council will want to place on record our thanks for the immense efforts put in by our own workforce, but also pay tribute to our communities and our partners. In January, we faced a second emergency when a blowout occurred at Goshen Park in Skewing. The flooding that resulted was both extensive and destructive. When I visited the area soon after the incident, I saw at first hand how the council, the community, and our partners have responded. And I also heard how the immediate response was very much appreciated by the Skewing community. I know from the recovery board work that the impact of this awful incident is continuing. Many residents are still unable to return to their homes, and some residents are facing financial hardship as well as emotional trauma. The work we are doing will continue for as long as is necessary to support our residents in recovering from this devastating disaster. Mr. Mayor, many people across our county borough have been directly affected by these two emergencies. Many, unfortunately, have experienced loss. So before moving on to talk about the year ahead, I would ask Council to join with me and pause for a brief moment for us all to reflect on the way these events have impacted upon our county borough. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, moving on to look at the year ahead, our focus will need to be firmly upon recovery. We will also, of course, be playing our part in making sure that we continue to respond to the ongoing COVID threat. The resources provided at the year end by Welsh Government, together with prudent financial management we have exercised over many years, will, as you will shortly see in the revenue outturn report, give us welcome financial resources to begin this work. I have asked officers to provide early advice on how we can earmark a portion of our reserves to target a number of priorities. These include actions to support people and businesses as the economy opens up. Encourage the great community action we have seen across the county borough. Encourage people to continue to be more active and to play their part in protecting our environment. Support our town centres and to support our schools in the vitally important work that they are doing with learners and families. We will also ensure existing programmes are delivered. For example, we will work with Powys Council and the Welsh Government to deliver a global centre for rail excellence. This project has the potential to transform the Neath and the Lys valleys and the surrounding areas. We will continue to work with investors interested in delivering a year-round resort in the Avon Valley, which has the potential of providing a top-class visitor attraction along with sustainable jobs. We will deliver the promised improvements in the Neath Town Centre, opening a state-of-the-art new leisure facility, new retail units, and a new modern library. This will improve footfall and provide a new lease of life for the town. We will complete the refurbishment of the plaza in Port Talbot and progress with our plans to develop facilities in Ponderdower. We will continue to work with partners to find sustainable solutions to flood and landslip risks across the county borough. And we will drive forward our decarbonisation programme within the Swansea Bay City deal. I have highlighted some of the programme, Mr Mayor, but there is a lot more detail in the plan. As well as focusing on the actions we will take this year, Mr Mayor, we will also, as outlined in the recent member seminar, be initiating a large engagement exercise over the summer and into the autumn. This exercise will give our workforce, our trade unions, local people, businesses and partners the opportunity to shape the way we move forward from the pandemic. In the autumn, we will debate the feedback we have received and use it to reset the Council's priorities and resources. I hope all members of Council will take part in this very important piece of work. Mr Mayor, the last year has been extraordinary, and there's no doubt that the year ahead will be full of challenges as well. I am confident that we have the stamina, imagination and determination not only rise to the challenges, but also to see the opportunities that are in front of us and to embrace them. On that note, Mr Mayor, I will conclude by asking Council, when you are ready, to formally endorse recommendations approved at the Cabinet meeting and which are set out on page 37 of the report. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
You're on mute, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Members, are there any questions or comments? Please raise your electronic hand or indicate via the chat function, and I will call upon you in turn.
Yes, I have done that, Chair, Mayor.
Councillor Llewellyn?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Neath for introducing the report. I want to refer in details to the different section of the report as has been subject to scrutiny before today's meeting. But the report does rightly refer to the response by all of our services and all of the council staff to the pandemic and the way in which our communities have been supported. It is important that government at all levels recognise the value and essential role of local councils, the county councils and community councils, and of course voluntary organisations as well. And as part of the national recovery from the COVID period, there needs to be proper investment in public services to overcome not only the effects of the pandemic, but also the years of austerity. We saw in the earlier audit report that Neath Talbot has 15% of the areas deemed most deprived in Wales, the fifth highest of the 22 unitary authorities in Wales. And we know that the inequalities created by these figures are not just between Neath Talbot and other local authorities, but within the county borough itself. So we have significant challenges in achieving our corporate plan and the well-being objectives, and ensuring that regeneration occurs across all our communities while combating inequalities, air quality problems and environmental targets. These are serious issues for many of our communities. We have, for instance, spoken at both the local and all Wales area about a valley strategy for a quarter of a century. But if anything, our indicators have gone into reverse in that period. There have been inevitable time lags in the reporting period of the corporate plan, given the pressures of the COVID period, and I think we all accept that. The executive summary explains that there will be a further report on the improvement priorities for 2020-2021 in the autumn of this year. And I think that will give us a further opportunity to assess progress and to prepare for the challenges ahead. In conclusion, I think we will all wish our appreciation to be fed back to our workforce at all levels for the tremendous work that they have undertaken during the past year. Thank you.
Thank you. Call on Councillor Steve Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try not to repeat Councillor Llewellyn's comments. Firstly, I welcome the report and I thank the leader for presenting it. It goes without saying the work that this authority has done in Skewin and elsewhere is commendable, and I think we all would agree with the way they've handled the pandemic has also been commendable, and the way our staff have diversified to make sure our communities have the best services. I will touch on a little bit of disappointments. When you create a corporate plan, certain objectives fall by the wayside. Kevin Coyd, for one, I would suggest is a failure story for this authority. For whatever reason, it's a failure in this authority. However, I'm a little bit disappointed also that the leader didn't mention the very serious incident that took place in my own ward with a gas explosion during the time that he indicates, and how our team did respond to that as well. For our community, that was something quite important and serious. As far as the Valley strategy goes, again, yeah, I would like to touch on that. That was set up a number of years ago, and but to be quite frankly, Mr. Mayor, the progress of that and deliverance has been nothing short of very, very poor indeed, and outcomes for it have not seen anything going forward there, namely Kevin Coyd again, as I touch on that. But in general, we have to have a corporate plan, Mr. Mayor. The corporate plan in front of us today, I certainly will be supporting, but I think a lot of work needs to be put forward, certainly for Valley communities going forward, and I hope to work with those officers and Cabinet and Council in to deliver something fit for purpose for our Valley communities as well as Neath and Talbot as a whole. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Call on Councillor Nigel Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to pay, if I could pay a brief tribute to Councillor Mark Jones, who represented Aberafan. Mark was a good man. He came from a good family. He was a good dad, good son, a brother, and he'll be missed by our community in Aberafan and in Baglan, where he was brought up. So I'd like Mark to rest in peace. Secondly, I'd like to congratulate the newest member of our council, Stephanie Lynch, who won the recent by-election in Aberafan. It was a really interesting by-election. We had some excellent candidates, and I look forward to working with Councillor Lynch going forward. And thirdly, what I'd like to ask a question about the corporate plan. So if you could bear with me, it's relating to 3.52 of the corporate plan. So in the corporate plan, paragraph 3.52, it states that as a council, we will use our statutory powers to challenge unacceptable levels of pollution. Although taking into account that the purpose of this report is not to address specific issues or evidence, one area of concern that this plan is silent on is how we use these powers to work with other organisations to address specific areas. And I would be grateful if you could clarify the arrangements on this. Having taken some advice on the nature of the questions I can ask, I would like to refer specifically to the Stowe gas-fired power station on Avon Way, as this is an example where I feel this engagement is necessary. So as well as the general question raised, if I could ask, how is the local authority using the powers open to it, and what engagement we have with other bodies, such as NRW, on the issued environmental permit with respect to permitted emission levels, the absence of CO or noise limits, and the levels of allowable NOx and the required monitoring regime, given the proximity to local housing and the potential impact on health. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hunt. This is a technical question. Could I call on Nicola Pearce if she could respond?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, in relation to Councillor Hunt's question, I appreciate that he did bring it up in the previous Cabinet scrutiny meeting. I understand since that meeting that officers from our Environmental Health Service have met with both Councillor Hunt and Councillor Percy, who also expressed interest in this particular site, to discuss the issue further. In Cabinet scrutiny, I did indicate that the authority are not the regulators of this site. The regulators are NRW, but we do have a very good working relationship with NRW in relation to a whole host of service areas that we are both responsible for and where those overlaps are. So we have been in discussion with those officers, and we have a meeting arranged with them the week after next to go through the different thresholds for the 2 permits that have been referred to by Councillor Hunt. So that is the permit which is in operation in relation to the store in his ward, as well as the store which is in operation within the Baglan Energy Park area. So they're different facilities and they have different permits and different thresholds. So we'll be going through the rationale behind those different thresholds with the NRW permitting officers, and all feedback will be given to members in due course. We are, as many members may well be aware, leading on a project as part of the city deal, which is covering the sort of area of supporting innovation and low carbon growth. And that is a programme which involves a number of different projects, one of which is concentrating on air quality to address the concerns in terms of areas, specific geographical areas of concerns, and also to address the perception of the public in terms of air quality. And as part of that project, we are intending to roll out a number of individual monitoring pieces of monitoring equipment which are manufactured within the region, and they will be able to be distributed within a wider area rather than just concentrating on the results from our official monitoring station. So this will give us better indications of the air quality levels within the immediate vicinity of an emitter than an emitter in terms of the store. In this case, that would be considered to be an emitter. We have been in discussion with the company that are providing us with these pieces of kit, and they've confirmed that we can potentially install a monitor within the areas around the store, and they will be able to measure NOx levels. They won't be able to measure carbon monoxide levels, but they will be able to measure NOx levels. Now, that may well assist us in gaining a better understanding of the air quality issues surrounding this particular site, which can be used in addition to the information that NRW are recording as part of their permit responsibilities. And as I've indicated, we're more than happy to feed back to members once those discussions have taken place and once we are a little bit more further along the line in terms of the installation of those air quality pieces of kit that I've referred to. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Now call on Councillor Anthony Richards.
Great, diolch yn fawr, Mr Mayor, and thank you to the leader for his contribution. I just had a question with regards to, you mentioned some initiatives for Neath and mentioned some initiatives for Port Talbot, and you did mention Pontardawe in passing, but I just wanted to ask, what specific initiatives has this council got, or what initiatives have you got intended for Pontardawe to benefit the local community, and not just of my ward and Councillor Purcell's ward of Pontardawe, but the surrounding Cwmtawe area as well. So what is planned for Pontardawe to benefit the local community? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I could ask a Chief Executive if she'd mind responding to this, go on.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm sure that one of the developments that the leader was highlighting in his speech, which is included, I think, in the plan, is the redevelopment of the Punjabi Art Centre itself and the proposal to establish a cinema within the building, which is a significant project that I know that you've agreed to fund. And in fact, we were discussing that this morning in our corporate directors group and are hoping to bring an update report forward in the very near future. So that was specifically, I think, what the leader was referring to, Mr. Mayor, as far as the corporate plan is concerned. I'm sure if members want some additional detail on other schemes that we are intending to roll out within the Pontardawe area, we could circulate that to the relevant scrutiny committee or to members by correspondence.
Thank you. Call now on Councillor Percy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing me to come in. I just want to put on record my thanks to officers in the Environmental Health Department, in particular for their support on the issues around the store. In particular, I just want to pick up on the air quality monitoring pilot project that Nicola just referred to. When this came to Region Committee back in early 2020, I met with officers at the time in environmental health to look at options of using this pilot project to monitor the store. And I just got to, again, put on record my thanks for how receptive the officers have been to my suggestions and concerns on this issue. And likewise to those of Councillor Hunt. And I hope we can come to a situation sometime soon where we're all a bit more comfortable with what's going on there. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you for that. We seem to have had a good debate now on this corporate plan.
If I may, I have indicated I would like to.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Welling. Okay, yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, for some reason the electronic hand keeps disappearing. I put it back up again.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for your indulgence, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to come back and perhaps ask the leader to, or invite the leader to respond to several of the points that have been made regarding the Valleys Initiative. I'm not the only member that's raised this question. And I would like to ask for an indication as part of the corporate plan, and before we receive an update in the autumn, as indicated in the report, how the Valleys Initiative strategy is going to be addressed, and how we are going to take this forward. Because frankly, we are not going to address several of the inequality issues that are in the corporate plan without being able to have a viable and logical Valleys strategy. So I'd invite the leader to respond to us at this stage so that we can obviously take part in the further discussion in the autumn when the further report is available to us. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, more than happy to accept Councillor Llewellyn's offer of working with us when we go forward when the reports are ready. I just briefly went through what's in front of Council today, and when we got more specific details, certainly invite Councillor Llewellyn and colleagues to take it forward with us.
Mr. Mayor, I'm grateful for that invitation, but obviously the question I was posing was a question for today. How are we actually going to take the Valleys Initiative forward? What has been achieved to date on that strategy? Obviously, I will, be very, very happy to accept the offer that the leaders has made for further dialogue. But surely we should be in a position of having developed that strategy by now to a much more workable point. Therefore, I'd like a response today on what we have achieved in the context of the corporate plan. And obviously we'll, participate in the discussions that the leader has offered from today onwards.
Karen, did you want to come in on it?
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, maybe useful if I could just check with Councillor Llewellyn. Are you asking Councillor Llewellyn if we can bring forward an update report on the Valley's strategy that was signed off a little while ago? Because there's no problem in us bringing forward a detail on that. I think the leader's mentioned a couple of things in his address, isn't he, around the GCRE project and the Avon Valley developments. But it might be useful, Mr Mayor, if you could just clarify if what's being sought is an update report, because I can certainly ensure that that is brought forward.
Well, anything like that will be welcome, Mr Mayor, but obviously my question was here today on the corporate plan that's before us, on the report that's before us. What has been achieved in relation to the Valley strategy? And I'm very, very happy to participate in how we take it forward from here, but what's been achieved to date? We've been talking about this for a quarter of a century in this authority.
Well, Councillor Llewellyn, the leader has responded, and you still wanted to try and satisfy yourself more about the question you asked. And the Chief Executive's replied that we'll be giving you a further report about this. I can't see how further we can go with the question today that you've asked.
Well, okay, there's no answer to my question then. That's the...
Well, there is an answer. The Chief Executive has responded, and further details will be given to you. Well, we proceed. Sorry, I can't say any more now.
Okay, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Well, members, we've had a good debate as well. Thank you, and a full debate on the corporate plan. I now refer members to a recommendation on page 37 of the report. Can I ask for a proposer and seconder?
Yeah, I move, Mr Mayor.
I second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. If you do not indicate to the contrary by raising your electronic hand, it will be assumed that you're in favour of the recommendations.
I can see no indications, Mr Mayor, that item has been approved.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr Mayor, the only thing I would say is that obviously in the update in the autumn, I would hope that some of the questions that have been addressed here today will be more fully answered than they have been during this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. I now refer to item 6, this members' induction and diversity in democracy, and I call on Mr Craig Griffiths, Head of Legal Services, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the first element of this report to members that are aware is obviously, as you will know, local government elections will take place in 2022, and it's important that prior to this, the Council reviews its induction programme that will take place following the election of the new members. What we propose to do is ask the Democratic Services Committee to work with officers and to give some input as to what they feel the induction programme would need to sort of satisfy. So we'll be asking Democratic Services Committee, subject to Council's approval today, to start that work with us over the summer months. In addition, we've also referenced in the report the recent Diversity and Democracy programme that the Welsh Local Government Association has embarked on the aim of trying to ensure that council chambers are more representative of their communities following the elections next year. As members will see at paragraph 7 of that report, this will actually include a declaration by this council that we will look at our Diversity and Democracy programme going forward as well. And again, we would like to ask Democratic Services Committee to work with us in this regard to take on board any views that members may have, and we will bring formal reports then back to council, or whether we need to consider any alternative forums like member seminars, so we can make sure that we get a wide cross-section of opinions in that section. So thank you, Mr Mayor. Happy to take any questions that members might have.
Members, are there any questions or comments? Please raise your electronic hand or indicate via the chat function, and I will call upon you in turn.
Councillor John Miller. John Miller.
Okay. Councillor Miller.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is on page 126.
Yes.
And it is D, item 3, to consider staggering council meeting times. I find this difficult to deal with. I believe that the reason for this is members were finding it difficult to attend council meetings as they are. May I comment on that, Chair. There
Yes.
is, within the Employment Rights Act, there is statutory duty to allow elected members to attend public duties. Can I urge that anyone within the council who is having difficulty having time off, refer it to their employer, and if they are still having difficulties, take it up with the trade unions. The point being, Chair,
yes,
is if we change the regulations to say when we are having meetings, that may impinge on our employment rights in due course. And I would hate to see that being removed from the Act. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Does Craig want to respond?
Would you like to
Yes, indeed. Thank
Craig?
you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Miller, for those comments. Absolutely correct in the interpretation of the legal provisions there. Just to add as well, from this council's perspective, as members will be aware, we do ask in an annual survey each year if members are happy with the start of the cycle with their allocated times for it, and then we also look to see what flexibilities we can achieve then in some small ways as well from the NPT perspective, and we will continue to embark on that and consider it as part of the work that we do on this programme. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I may respond to that, you were looking for items to go forward with your councillor inductions, etc. You may wish to mention or highlight the Act when new councillors are elected and bring it to their attention. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. You made a note of that. Thank you, Councillor Miller. Yep. I now refer to members to the recommendations on page 134 of this report. Can I ask for a proposal and seconder?
Move, Mr. Mayor.
I second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. If you do not indicate to the contrary by raising your electronic hand, it will be assumed that you are in favour of the recommendation.
I can see no indications to the contrary, Mr. Mayor, so that's been approved.
Thank you. I now refer you to agenda item 8, which is
Agenda item 7, Chair.
Sorry, item 7. Appointment of a Director of Finance and Strategic Programmes. I call upon Mr. Craig Griffiths to introduce the report.
You're on mute, Craig.
You see, we're going into the habit of it by now almost, so apologies for that, members. So as members will see from the report, our current Director of Finance, Mr. Howard Jenkins, will be retiring from the Council in October this year. And so a report now is brought before Council today for approval to commence the recruitment process for a new Director of Finance, and the details of the process and the proposed timetable then are set out today for members to note and to ultimately then approve. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions or comments? Please raise your electronic hand or indicate by the chat function, and I will call upon you in turn.
I can see no indications, Mr. Mayor, so that there are no questions.
Yeah. Thank you. I now refer members to a recommendation on page 134 of the report. Can I ask for proposer and seconder?
Move, Mr. Mayor.
I second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. If you do not indicate to the contrary by raising your electronic hand, it will be assumed that you're in favour of the recommendation.
Again, I can see no indications to the contrary, Mr. Mayor, so that's been approved.
Thank you. Now we come on to agenda item 8. Youth Scrutiny Chair and membership changes. I call upon Mr. Craig Griffiths to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So members will receive today some updated changes the Council have asked to approve to our committee membership. But in summary, the Chief Executive has now received notification of a nominee for the position of the chairs and vice chairs of our Cabinet Scrutiny Committee, being Councillor Saifa Rahman and Councillor Sharon Freegard, respectively. There are also some changes to committee memberships as a result of our recent by-election and the member appointed there, and some changes to our outside bodies, all of which are then detailed in the report. So they're brought before members today for final approval. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Members, Are any questions or comments? Please raise your electronic hand or indicate by the chat function, and I will call upon you in turn.
I can see no indications, Mr. Mayor, so there
Yep.
doesn't seem to be any questions.
I now refer members to the recommendation on page 145. Can I ask for proposer and seconder?
Move, Mr. Mayor.
I second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. If you do not indicate to the contrary by raising your electronic hand, it will be assumed that you are in favour of the recommendation.
I can see no indications to the contrary, Mr. Mayor, so that one has been approved.
Thank you. On agenda item 9, notice of motion. There are no notice of motions received. I'll go on to item 10. Any questions under Rule 9.2? No questions have been received. And on agenda item 11, urgent items. I have received no urgent items, so that ends the business for today. And thank you for you all attending today. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you,
Bravo,
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor.
Bye.
Diolch